Good afternoon. This is Jason Dean from Film Fanatic. If anyone out there in the World Wide Web likes the channel, it's pretty new. I started it. I started the well. The story is when I was I actually set up a YouTube channel probably about a year ago or so. And at first I was reluctant to do videos, mostly because I was just kind of intimidated to do YouTube videos. Initially, about a year ago, I started doing live videos on my Film Fanatic page on Facebook. And then I also started doing live videos on my Instagram page for Film Fanatic at Main Film Fanatic. And I was doing those, and that was a new thing. And it seemed to really help with the traffic and people checking out the channel. And the primary focus of the channel and of the web pages that I have and the Facebook page is to try to give light to films that might have been overlooked or lately the past year it's been pretty focused on obscure films, obscure horror films, exploitation films, and what have you that a lot of people haven't seen. There is a huge base of people who dig those films, but a good majority of people have never heard of those films, and especially if you're a fan of horror and science fiction, there's a whole kind of unknown universe, and I've been discovering a lot of films through checking films out that I grew up watching as a kid, and they've been reissuing them on Blu-ray. So that kind of started the whole kind of snowball effect for me as far as diving in and checking out other films that were kind of related or underneath that or in that genre, but I hadn't seen. So it's been really cool. So the primary focus of the channel and the pages has always been to try to give light to films that are maybe not so well known. But I love going to the movies, and I love all kinds of films, and I go to see, uh, you know, films in the theater whenever I get a chance. So I try to, bring some light to that for whatever it's worth. I just did a show on Jordan Peele's new movie Nope, which was just an incredible movie. So I try to mix it up, but still the primary focus is on more unknown, obscure films. So, but if you get a chance, check out the page. It's growing. It's still really new. And what I was saying before, I started out with this page doing just reviews, and then over a period of a few years, the page has been in existence for about 4 years or so. And over about this past year, it's actually a little over a year ago now, I started doing these live Facebook pages, live reviews, and I had a few interview segments where I had a couple of guests, and I'm going to try to do more of that in the future. But I was basically or essentially doing live reviews where I would talk about the movies and that kind of thing. And that's been a lot of fun and a big, for me, provided a real learning curve to how to work with technology I'm not very familiar with, and then also how to build a little bit of an audience and that kind of thing. And I had this YouTube channel also. I had set up a YouTube channel, Jason Dean YouTube channel, and I basically was a little reluctant to do that because I felt at least with Facebook, anybody who follows the page, we're close to about 600 people who follow the page, and on Film Fanatic on the Facebook page. So right away, I felt like that's a cool thing with doing a live uh, Facebook Live videos because automatically you get a lot of people checking out the video. Right off the cuff, because people get notifications and then people like the stuff in the moment or comment or whatever, and that's been really cool. So you guaranteed an audience after a couple of years. So that was one of the allures of moving into that. I never really felt comfortable in front of a camera or speaking per se, so that was also a factor. But but I've kind of gotten over it, and I've looked at it as just kind of learning something new that requires a pretty good skill set to to try to get your point across. And a lot of guys, there's a couple of people that I really love on YouTube, Chris Stuckman and another guy called Moods who does reviews, and they both have YouTube channels. So they were real big inspirations for me to do this and to take some chances. And as far as the YouTube thing goes, it's not really the same thing as far as like you're guaranteed an audience. It seems to be a lot harder to garner an audience with YouTube where Facebook you can just send out invites and people can like the page and people get notified. Whereas YouTube, you have to share things, and it's a lot more of a struggle. It seems to be the struggle seems to be more on getting traffic. But then a few months ago, I got this new microphone, and I wanted to try to expand on it. And I had a friend, Daniel Richmond, a great friend of mine, who also does like lots of web work. He's used to do lots of web design stuff. He was really encouraging me to step it up a little bit and just to maybe start a YouTube channel and to try to maybe increase the quality and the content on it. So thanks to him, I kind of started doing it. So I got this newer setup. I have this new microphone, and I've been using my laptop to record these newer videos for the YouTube channel. And I feel like the quality, at least from a technical standpoint, is a lot better. So I'm gonna proceed with doing videos for Film Fanatic this way. So it's been a lot of fun because you can edit things. You don't have to. There isn't the pressure if something goes wrong in a live setting where you can't really fix it. And that's been an issue definitely in the past with doing the Facebook videos. But with this, I can kind of edit things. I can chop them up or just delete them and redo them and do it at a little bit more of my leisure, and there's a little bit less 2-degree pressure to do the videos. So this will be the new format from now on. So yeah, before I get started, I have wanted to kind of get into something that's definitely music and movie related because again, the primary focus of Film Fanatic is to focus on movies that I really love. So this is all related I feel like it's all related to these subjects. So I have a good friend, Jeff Weinberger, who is an amazing musician, a really great friend. I had many years of experience playing with him in different projects and bands and stuff, and he's a really great guy. One of the most talented people I know, one of the smartest cookies around. So, but the other day he had shared this post on Facebook, and basically it was from The Guardian, and basically it was the title of the article is "Bring the Beat Back. Why are people in their 30s giving up on new music?" And I thought that was a real interesting article. Or it sounded really interesting. So I checked it out. And basically the whole more or less it seemed like the general premise or synopsis of that article was that people were, once they reach a certain age, they get into their 30s or 40s, they kind of, to a degree, don't follow the same bands as much as they used to. There tends to be this runoff of people who maybe get disenfranchised or are not invested in things as much. For me, like growing up, the first few bands I got into, say like Kiss or Led Zeppelin or Black Sabbath, those bands were integral in my youth. They had such an impact, and they still continue to have an impact. And those bands I still listen to this very day. I own, like say Black Sabbath, for instance, or even Led Zeppelin. I pretty much own all of the whole, catalog of their music. I've spent time diving deep into, learning about their music. Not only as a fan of their music, but then also trying to develop myself as a musician because I feel like on an educational standpoint, trying to learn the, the 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 mechanics of what made those songs classics is pretty essential. So, but and also just as being a fan of music, it's a great experience because it's an enriching experience, and that's why we're attracted, hopefully, to art and music in general. But I also look at it as an educational thing, like a continuum of that, So, but so those bands, I find like and there's many other bands that I could say the same thing for, and also with film, the same thing with films. There's lots of films I've seen numerous times. There's directors that I have been following for years, and I am always excited for when they have a new release coming out. And it's the same thing for me. It's a kind of an obsession, and the same thing of like a continuum of where I'm a fan of those two art forms, but then it's also I'm really interested in the technical aspect on how these things were executed, whether it's a film, a great film, or a great album. So I'm always learning about trying to learn on an educational standpoint. With film, it's I learned I learned a lot from film as far as aesthetics and pacing and building tension, releasing tension, and that those film influences spill over heavily into my band Quantum, as far as like how we do live shows, where we have a like a theatrical element to the music with various masks and costumes and aesthetics and lights, and so that I've learned a lot through my love of film, and also the music is heavily inspired by film soundtracks and film scores, so that's another aspect. And obviously comes from the music standpoint of certain albums that I love or artists that I check out. So it all kind of influences that and helps me learn and develop and to try to push myself and dive a little bit deeper into how to express an idea. So, but the general synopsis from what I got from this article was that kind of came across like there's that whole argument or that whole thing that every generation says where you get to a certain age, you're youthful and you're into a certain group of bands and you're into a lot of like new music, and then certain people get to a certain age and they only acknowledge the music from their youth. They only seem to respect that period. And a lot of the times, I almost kind of feel like I kind of call it the grandpa syndrome sometimes, where you have people always say, well, they don't make them like they used to. You get to a certain age and you cut yourself off from newer things that are coming out. Same thing can be said exactly, I feel, at least in my little opinion. The same thing can be said for film. There's that whole argument, you get to a certain generation or a certain age and you kind of cap it off and you basically say, well, there's nothing new, whether it's film or music or books or whatever it is, but this focus on this show is on music and obviously film. And there's always this cap off that can happen for certain people and groups of people where they just get into that whole thing of where they feel like there's no new things that are giving them that fire that make them that excited. So, and then also my friend Jeff was making the point that like he used the example or two examples about this whole kind of situation or the general synopsis of this article. Whereas like you could take an artist, say like Nick Cave, who's been around for like, I don't know, close to 35 years, and he's got a really rabid loyal fan base, and people have stayed with his music and follow him and pay tickets to go see his music, to go see him in concert, buy his records, all those kinds of things. They do it now. They did it back when he started. He's got a loyal fan base that know his whole discography, and the whole age thing isn't a factor, you know. And I feel like, well, that's testimony because Nick Cave is kind of a genius and he's an amazing artist, and it kind of defies, and it also, uh, at the end of the day, he leaves such a mark and has such quality work that it goes beyond those kinds of limitations. So he used like Nick Cave, for instance, and then he also used an artist like that that's a more of a modern artist, Bruno Mars, who is quite a bit younger and is more of a, I guess you could say, a pop star. And that they're, you know, now that Bruno Mars is getting older, people, he feels like the general public won't really stay with that artist and see him develop and follow him throughout his entire years, for, you know, as he gets older. And I feel like, yeah, there's definitely that thing. I feel like there's definitely, um, there's a cap at some point. But I also, in my own opinion too, I also feel like it's about the quality. If you have, you know, an artist or a filmmaker or, you know, a really great talented musician, what you leave behind or what you have is your body of work. And certain artists and musicians have this real complete body of work where there's like a consistent thing, and they develop and change and get and surprise you. But their body of work is their calling card. And I feel like if it's really strong and it has something to really say, it will resonate with people regardless of age or regardless of class or what have you. And I feel like that's the quality of the work should hopefully speak for itself. And I would feel like, you know, in the case of those two artists, they're very, very different from each other, obviously. But, you know, I feel like, well, someone like Nick Cave has a body of work that, you know, kind of transcends all of that and is more consistent and can sustain his entire career because of the sheer quality, say, comparison to Bruno Mars, where that's not really the case, you know. So, but those are two extremes. And it also, you know, it goes back again to the argument of, well, they don't, you know, they don't make good movies anymore. They don't make, there's not any really good bands anymore. They don't put out good albums and blah, blah, blah. And it ties into also with, you know, people's attention spans now. People, you know, I worked with kids for a really long time at a teen center, and I remember having conversations with kids that were in middle school and high school, and it was a cool time. Well, it was a great job and a really great time in my life, but one of the cool things was that I was turned on to a lot of different bands and certain styles of music that were kind of emerging from that generation that I had not heard before. One style in particular I remember getting turned on to a lot during that period was trap music. I got, you know, a huge electronic music's my favorite style, and you know, I love hip hop and rap, and this was like kind of a modern version of that, and I was very excited by hearing a lot of that music. So there were a lot of things I got turned on to by the kids of music wise, or new things that were coming out that were kind of, I felt, were really contemporary and also exciting. So, but I remember there were many situations too where I remember talking to kids about music, and you know, we would talk about maybe a band or something that they were listening to, and they were saying, well, like, say, I don't know, it could be a band like um geez, I can't even think of a band right now, but for, just for the argument or the discussion, basically they would name a band that they like a new modern band, and they would say, and I'd say, oh, you know, is this one of your favorite bands? And they would say, oh yeah, 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 this is like, I really love these guys or girls, or you know, like say Lady Gaga, for instance. They would say, oh yeah, I'm a huge Lady Gaga fan, and I really love her music, and I'd be like, oh cool. And then a lot of the times when I'd have these conversations with the kids, I wouldn't really know what the music was or the band. It would be something new, and I'd be like, oh, so what do you have any of their albums, or how many albums do they have out, or what's your favorite album? And typically what they would say, well, I have a playlist and I have two songs on it, and that's it. And I was always like, wow, like that's wild. Like you get exposed to a band that you like and you download it from various, some platform. Now it's mostly Spotify, and you consider yourself a fan of this artist. And whereas like I'm from the generation of like if I like a band, I'll like typically dive in and check out their discography, and I'll if I love the band or really dig them, I'll buy all their albums and I'll be really familiar. Case in point, say Led Zeppelin. I'm very familiar with all their albums. I love I love some of their studio albums a lot, but I have them and I have access to all of them, and I'm familiar with it. A newer band that is kind of equivalent to that is Death Heaven, which is a newer rock band. It's been around for about 10 years. I got into them, and the same thing where I went out to the local record shop and I bought as many of their albums as I could get, and now I have their whole catalog, pretty much. So I'm familiar with that, and I consider myself a big fan of theirs. So it's a different thing where if you have a couple of tracks from the band and there's you have them on your playlist that you listen to on your phone, so that you at that point that person or that kid considers themselves to be a fan. So it's whereas I feel like if you're into a certain artist, you're really kind of selling yourself short. And I feel like that's a dilemma where people don't, or this generation or that generation at that point, when they discover a new artist, they don't dive deep into, you know, their catalog and trying to discover a whole new world, and so it's very, very different. And it's also the attention span of people too. We're in the age of TikTok where, you don't, people are relying on these like 20-second videos or soundbite videos. And even a lot of the times on YouTube, there's like these 20-second videos of various people or various artists, and you're never really given the experience of really diving in and having that experience of interjecting with that music and letting it absorb into your mind and body, and to have that experience of of really what music's supposed to be about. So it's kind of this weird fragmented almost like fast food culture that I feel like we have for from a generational perspective of where things are coming at you all the time. They're quick and fast and furious, and whatever kind of quickly sticks in your head, you'll stick with it for a little while, but then you'll kind of just forget about the next thing, and there's not any attention, or you're not going to discover that artist or that group or that filmmaker and dive into that world. And I feel like that's a generational thing. It's a really strange thing. I'm not quite sure, but I think it's a cultural thing. I think it's unfortunately one of the aspects of the technology that we have access to. I feel like it's a real negative effect of that because of how we get information. And also in this article, they were talking about how this guy in particular was saying how he just felt there really wasn't anything new and exciting that was coming out and grabbing his heart. And in my own opinion, I completely disagree. I feel like, almost on a daily basis, I'm hearing new music that I'm really inspired by, and new groups that I am, that really make me excited and fired up. And, case in point, JD Bex and Domi, which is this drum and keyboard duo that are making this really, interesting fusion of jazz and hip hop. They just came out with a new album, amazing stuff. There's a band I just recently got into that's been around for a few years, Run the Jewels. I think they're one of the most probably for my money the best like hip hop rap group right now, and they're doing a lot of new and interesting things that a lot of people didn't do. There's so many artists and bands that I'm coming across. Thundercat is another example. As far as pop music or hip hop stuff goes, Dojo Cat, I feel like she's doing some really interesting things. So there's all this new stuff, and I feel like there's no shortage of new stuff that's coming out. I think now with the internet and like the collapse of the so-called music industry, people are getting a smaller piece of the pie, but that doesn't really stop artists from making content. And I feel like there's so much stuff coming out that it's almost hard to keep up with. But there's no shortage of talent out there. Yeah, on the other side of things, because of technology, people can make all of their home recordings and do all of these multiple things in their living room. So on one aspect, people have like a that now everybody and their grandmother can throw their hat in a lot and create music for virtually nothing, or sell their art for virtually nothing because of the because of social media, and that's going to always be a thing, and they're probably not, really, they, you know, the quality of that stuff is not very good, and they probably shouldn't be doing that. But at the end of the day, I feel like good art is good art, and I feel like if these people have that calling card and it resonates with people, it's going to stand the test of time, and it's going to be known and on some level by people that, oh, this is really cool, and they'll build that audience because regardless of style, genre, location, especially now with the internet, these things will eventually resonate with people, and they do. So, and as far as films go, I've had that argument because the primary focus of this page obviously is film and movies. That's been a thing too. I hear all the time that there's not any, they don't make films like they used to. There's too much CGI. There's too many comic book movies. There's too many of this and that, and there's less and less character based movies. And I agree. To a degree, there's that too, of course. But I also feel like there's some incredible films also being made right now. I mean, I typically, in my music taste and in my film taste, I typically always, my go-to period is like the 70s and early 80s. Like I typically always go back to that stuff for certain films I really love and music. I just love the way a lot of that stuff is recorded. It's got a raw quality to it. I always go back to that. That's like my constant source of like a well of inspiration that I always go back to. But that being said, like as far as films, I think there's films now and directors that are just incredible. I mean, like I could just think of a few. Denis Villeneuve, he's just an incredible director. Ari Aster, another director. Robert Eggers, uh, Jordan Peele, Alex Garland. There's there's a whole slew of directors right now, filmmakers that are making these incredible science fiction horror films that I feel are really new and fresh and innovative. And the majority of these guys are making things that are, completely original, that are just, it's all from their imagination. It's not based on a graphic novel or a comic book of any sort. It's all from their imagination. And so I feel like when people say that, it's kind of a slap in the face that to these filmmakers, because they're really, I feel in my book, they're real movers and shakers, and they're taking this art form and moving it forward. And then the other thing too, to add to some of this talk or discussion, is the streaming services and how its effects on movie ticket sales. Like recently, two movie theaters that I like a lot just announced that they're pretty much closing. And the Belfast Colonial Theatre is basically going to be closing until they find another person to hopefully buy it and to keep it going. The people who have run it for many years are retiring, so they're retiring, and they're waiting for the, hopefully owners to come by and rejuvenate it and to open it up again as a movie theater. But they're going to be essentially closing, I believe, like sometime next month. So it could be closed for a very long time. So that's a pretty big thing. And then the other thing that was just announced was that Flagship, the same thing, they're going to be closing, uh, possibly permanently. And it's all due to, and from what I read, they did have a good summer, but these theaters are struggling because of streaming, essentially, that people are not going to the theater. I've gone to both of those theaters over the years multiple times. In the past year or two, I've been going mostly to Flagship. And with the exception of maybe one or two times, I've noticed that really nobody goes there, and it's really strange. I went to see the latest Jordan Peele movie on a Friday night with a group of friends, and Jordan Peele's a huge name. I saw it on a Friday night, and there was a little group of us, and there was virtually like maybe four or five other people in this entire theater. And this movie was in the biggest theater in Flagship, and it was on one hand it was great because it felt like we had the whole theater to ourselves, but then on the other hand it was like, wow, like this is bananas. Like nobody goes to theaters anymore. I went to see The Northman there, a Robert Eggers movie, and that was actually really busy. I saw that a few months ago. And then the other time I went there, I had seen Halloween, and I saw that on Halloween, and that night it was very busy. But generally, I've gone there a lot over the last year or so, and there's like nobody there, and it's all due to the streaming thing. And I feel like it's all related to what I started off this discussion about the idea of the people not, you know, looking to have things at a convenience and not really taking the time to invest in the real experience of that band or that album, and also for the film. Because most films are made to have that, ritualistic experience of where you like immerse yourself for that hour or 2 hours, and you forget about what's going on in your day, and you hopefully lose yourself and have that total immersive experience, in the theater, like in the dark. Same thing with an album. You're supposed to have that experience of where you it takes you away, and it takes you out of the everyday mundane kind of parts of our existence. But that's been lost, and I feel like now it's like people want to get things quick, easy, and cheap, and they want to get that thing on their laptop or their home phone or on their phone or on their their TV that they have at home. But I feel like that experience gets lost. It's nowhere near as immersive. The quality isn't. But again, you can't stop it. You can't. It's not going to change. It's going to be a wild. It's a wild thing to see where this will all go. And in my experience from watching films, I've had that experience where I've seen films in the theater, then I'll watch it on Blu-ray, and then I might watch it over someone's house, the same film like on Netflix or something, because I don't have any streaming platforms here. I notice, because of however the technology is that is used for these streaming services, there's a certain level of compression, and the quality of the sound and the picture are kind of like condensed into this like weird audio visual sandwich. So everything is kind of compressed, and I in my mind, my experience of watching films in that format is it's not the clarity isn't there, whether it's the sound or the visual aspect, especially the visual. And there's something to do. I don't exactly know the specifics, but there's something that happens with when they offer these movies and the technology that's used or required to do these streaming services, where there's a certain level of compression that subtle aspects of those films get lost. Whereas like if you go to a theater, a good theater, and see it, there isn't that compression on the actual film or the film stock or the digital version of the film. The same thing for, and I feel it's the same thing if you listen to something on your phone, earbuds or whatever, an album, as opposed to listening to it on a nice stereo or something with nice speakers. There's this level of, there isn't that quality control. So it gets lost, But again, you can't stop that because that's where technology is going, and I'm not sure where it's going to go, but at the end of the day, I feel like people are going to still be making this art, and wherever people, well, the question is how people will access this stuff in the future, and I feel like as musicians and artists, we kind of have to adapt to this technology or adapt to the newer way of how people interact with content. So it's a very interesting thing. But that being said, I feel it's all related. It's all related, whether it's an album or film, but the it comes down to the experience of how you check something out. But anyway, so I'm going to get back to the topic, the main topic. So I just recently came across this movie. Again, like I had started off the show talking about a couple of YouTube guys that I really like. One in particular, who's probably my favorite, is this guy. He's from Canada, and his name is Moods, Moodz, and he's awesome. He does movie reviews, and he has one of probably the most insane movie collection that he has. He's a really hardcore collector of films, but he's also a fan. Like, he sees everything that he owns, and he's got thousands upon thousands of movies. It's amazing. But one of the cool things about his show is he really specializes on a lot of the horror exploitation films and grindhouse films that came out in the 70s. Like all of these amazing, like super obscure movies. That's kind of his main thing. Tons of giallo Italian horror films, some European films, a lot of American slasher films, uh, you know, all these various exploitation films, zombie films. He's an endless source of knowledge as far as those things go. So that's how I came across this movie called Forced Entry. And this movie was totally wild. This is the case for it, Forced Entry. This came out in 1976. The artwork is super cool. I haven't done an actual post on this movie yet, but I'm definitely going to do it very soon. But this movie is totally wild. The artwork is just great. Very cool. Again, got this at Bull Moose. And then there's a second cover here. This is inside. And this is a really great little package. The only thing that's disappointing is there isn't any real special features. It's a pretty obscure movie, but it was a pretty good price, and I had heard about this movie, and I was like, I should definitely get this. And it's from 1976, and it was directed by Jim Sotos, and it stars Tanya Roberts, Ron Max, and Nancy Allen. Forced Entry, and it came out in 1976. And the interesting thing when I first heard about this movie was this movie was like a remake originally of a movie that came out a few years before this came out, and the original version of this was essentially a porn movie called Forced Entry, which isn't a surprise when you hear the title. And this was like the original version, Forced Entry, which was pretty much a full-on porno movie, was rated X, and this is rated R. And I don't think this had a whole like a lot of. I don't think this had a huge distribution. It's and it was under a different name when it came out. It's The Blu-ray packaging is just pretty phenomenal. It was yeah, originally it's under two different titles, this film, Forced Entry. It's under the title of The Last Victim and Forced Entry. And there's like a director's cut. And it's a really it's definitely it's so incredibly raw. It's such an incredibly raw movie. The the acting's kind of terrible in it, but I love this movie. The whole movie is centered on this guy who is it's kind of told, the whole like kind of narrative of the story is it's told from the mindset of a serial killer. And it's basically, there's all this voiceover, and it's all the dialogue that you hear, the voiceover aspect of the film is basically him talking about his interactions with different people, like him driving around the city. And he's also a gas attendant. And he so like he's at work or whether he's home, he he's kind of at war in his head about his like desires and his feelings. And the whole film is kind of told from that perspective. And so it's really interesting. It's, big fan of serial killer movies, but this movie was cool. Like, it was a really original, kind of different perspective, and it's super raw. Like, it's super low budget. It's really sleazy. The music is great. It's got all this great, like, it's got this classic 70s kind of vibe to it because it came out in 76, or it came out originally in 75, and then under that title, The Last Victim, and then it came out in 76 as Forced Entry. And it's so raw. It's so incredibly raw and kind of dirty and nasty. And it actually has one of the best. The ending for this film is just incredible. Because you see, like I said, the film, the way the film is structured, and then like the narrative of the film is that it's all kind of told from the perspective of from what's going on in his head and how he's interacting with people, particularly women. But the ending is for the film is pretty amazing without giving it away. And it's a short film. It's only like an hour and 20 minutes. And again, the only disappointment is there aren't any special features, but the Blu-ray transfer of it is amazing. Like, the sound and the picture is really good. I was really impressed. And I bought it, like I said, on a whim. I had heard about it a few months ago. It sounded great, so I bought it. And so I was really excited. I definitely recommend it, Forced Entry. I haven't seen the original, but maybe at some point I will. And again, it's one of those movies you know, I had not heard about it at all, so I went into it cold and I bought it, and I was, and I really dig it. I've seen it a couple times since I bought it, and yeah, it's great. I highly recommend it. Forced Entry, 1972. The cast is great. Again, there's some obviously some really bad acting and some bad dialogue, but it's part of the charm of it. But it's an intense movie, and especially the ending is really great. It's got one of the better endings for a film I've seen in a while. So, again, this is Jason, Film Fanatic. I'm going to wrap it up there. And thanks again for checking out the page. If you get a chance, like and subscribe to the page for the YouTube channel, Jason Dean. And we will see you next time. Peace.